Recently, I participated in a volunteer experience that required me to go to Binford Elementary in order to assist with a STEM bus that travels to different elementary schools to set up activities. I arrived at 8:35 a.m. so that I could check in at the front office before the start time of 8:45 a.m. I was the only IU student to show up on time, and it took about an hour for more students to arrive. When I arrived, I helped set up the tables with an iPad activity that required students to predict if objects were conductors or insulators. It took about 20 minutes for the instructor and I to set up the tables and put the correct materials together for each table. The materials that were at each table included an iPad, a dongle, a junk box drawer with different miscellaneous objects, and a motherboard with corresponding connectors. In the junk drawer, there were objects such as Play-Doh, a DVD, a paperclip, a piece of wood, a feather, a pencil, tinfoil, a cork, a nail, a checker piece, and graphite on a note card. With these objects, students were required to predict if the objects were either conductors or insulators. With these predictions, they could test the objects out with the Makey Makey motherboard. By connecting the iPad to the Makey Makey motherboard with a dongle, students could then attach the objects to the motherboard with the connecting wires. The website was preloaded on the iPad, so students just had to start connecting objects to the motherboard. The students were required to test each object so that they could see if their predictions were correct. From there, they made adjustments for part two of the experiment. After the predictions were corrected, students could then connect all objects to the motherboard at once. By holding hands as a group and touching different objects, the children could act as insulators and create different sounds with different objects. The iPad would play the music, and the students were able to choose the theme of the music played, so they chose a Halloween monster theme. Once students began to come out, I was in charge of explaining the activity and guiding them through the process. The groups that I were assigned were fourth and fifth grade students. In my first group, I had difficulty getting a little girl to participate with her two partners. But once I asked her questions directly, she began to participate on her own. This group struggled to work together, but most of the answers they came up with were correct. In my second group of four children, I had one child who began to scream and sing for no reason. Once I guided him to take over one of the tasks of the project, he began to become more interested because the project could not be completed without him. This group's predictions were pretty spot on, and they were able to work together nicely to come up with their predictions. They only had to correct three answers. Group one spent a lot of time on making their predictions, so they did not have much time to make music on the iPad. They seemed to have the most fun on this part of the activity, though. They were required to hold hands in order to make the music, and this was the point in which the two students started to work as a team. They even started to play the beats of popular songs with objects. Group two had a blast making music. This group had three students, so they were able to make more elaborate music because they had more hands available. They became a bit rambunctious, but after some mediation, they were able to agree on who touches what objects and to what beat they could play. From these experiences with the two groups, I learned that people have different motivations and likes or dislikes. I had to learn how to redirect the individual students along with the collective group differently because one-size instructions do not fit all. I also learned that it takes a bit for students to become comfortable, but after that adjustment period that is aided by my help, these students are just as capable as their peers. I was uncomfortable at first because I didn't have a prior experience with working with younger children. However, I had a great time at Binford Elementary, and I think that helping children integrate technology into their learning is invaluable.